Don't touch that door, Rafiq. If you walk out now, there's no coming back. The words cracked through the dimly lit room like the lash of a whip, sharp and cold. Amina stood near the wooden table, her hands pressed flat against its rough surface, her eyes refusing to soften. Rafiq froze, one hand still on the rusted handle, his chest heaving as though the very air inside the house no longer belonged to him. He had carried the weight of silence for too long, but the sound of her voice, harder than steel, yet trembling at its edges, was the thing that finally broke him. He turned slowly, his jaw clenched. No. Coming back? Amina, do you think there was ever a way back for me? From the moment you buried that letter in the drawer, you chose my fate. His voice cracked into a rasp, anger and grief folding into each other. Across the room, an oil lamp flickered, its glow tracing shadows across. The cracked walls, shadows that seemed to lean closer as if listening. The letter. Amina's fingers curled against the table. She had hidden it months ago, the one piece of paper that carried more weight than their vows, more weight than the life they had tried to build in this forgotten town. On that paper was the truth of Rafiq's father, the betrayal that had led to ruin, the confession that could have rewritten his past. But Amina had kept it hidden, fearing what it might ignite. She had believed silence was a kindness. Tonight, she realized silence was also cruelty. Rafiq's shoulders sagged as though the fight inside him had nowhere left to go. He walked back, into the room, the thud of his boots echoing off the wooden floor. "Do you know what it's like," he said quietly, "to search for your father in the faces of strangers? To wonder if the blood running through you is poison, or if it ever carried love? You could have spared me those nights, Amina, but you chose to protect a name, not me." His words fell heavy, each one laced with years of unshed grief. Outside, the wind pressed against the house, rattling the shutters as though the world itself wanted to intrude. The air carried the smell of rain, of earth waiting to break open. Amina's chest tightened. She had loved him with a love that tried to heal, but in her attempt to shield him, she had become the keeper of his pain. She reached into the drawer, pulled out the folded letter, and laid it on the table. Its edges were worn, the ink faded. "Read it then," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Read it, and hate me if you must, but know that I only feared what it would do to you." Rafiq stared at the letter without touching it. For a long time, silence sat between them, thicker than any wall. His breath came in shallow bursts, his hands curled into fists at his sides. "I am already broken, Amina," he murmured. "Do you think words on paper can make me worse than I am? Or do you fear they'll show me a truth you never wanted? Me to see?" Her eyes glistened, but she refused to look away. "I feared it would turn you into your father, that it would give you his rage, his hunger for revenge. I wanted to save you from that." Her voice trembled now, softer than before, but still carrying the weight of every sleepless night. She stepped closer, the floor creaking beneath her. "But maybe I was wrong. Maybe the truth is the only thing that could set you free." Rafiq reached forward at last, his fingers brushing the paper like it was something alive, something dangerous. He hesitated, then pulled it open. His eyes moved quickly, tracing the lines, his lips tightening with each word. The silence grew louder, the only sound the faint scratch of the wind outside. When he reached the end, he closed his eyes and pressed, the letter against his chest as though it burned him. Amina waited. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, but she did not speak. The room felt smaller now, the walls leaning inward with their shared pain. Finally, Rafiq opened his eyes, his gaze locking onto hers. There was no fire in them, only a storm that had yet to break. "You were wrong," he said, his voice low and steady. "I don't hate you. I hate that you thought I wasn't strong enough to carry the truth." The lamp flickered once more, its flame bending as if bowing under the weight of their words. Amina swallowed hard, her body trembling as though something inside her had just collapsed. She had braced herself for his fury, for his absence. Instead, she was left with something far heavier, the unbearable knowledge that love had not been enough to save them from silence. Rafik placed the letter back on the table with slow, deliberate care, as if letting go of it might shatter whatever thin thread was keeping him together. His chest rose and fell with unsteady breaths, his eyes locked on the flickering lamp. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It pressed down like an unseen hand, suffocating and sharp. Amina wanted to reach for him, but her body felt rooted to the floor, as though the truth she had finally unveiled had built a wall instead of tearing one down. At last, Rafik spoke, his voice low, but edged with something darker. It wasn't just lies, Amina. It was theft. He didn't just abandon us. He built his life on betrayal, on taking what wasn't his, and now I know the blood in me carries that stain. His words carried both fury and despair, and the way he held himself, rigid, trembling, made it clear the storm inside him had only just begun. Amina's throat tightened. You are not him, Rafik. You fought your whole life not to be him. Her plea came out desperate, but he turned his head, his gaze cold and distant. You don't understand, he muttered. That man destroyed lives, and the letter proves it. His confession wasn't guilt. It was pride. He wrote it because he thought someone would carry it forward. Maybe he thought I would. The room seemed to shrink. The shadows cast by the lamp stretched long across the floor, crawling toward the door where moments ago he had almost walked out. For the first time, Amina realized what she had feared most was now standing before her. Not that Rafik would be broken, but that he might believe vengeance was his inheritance. She shook her head, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. If you carry his anger, you will finish what he started. And then you'll prove every fear I had right. Her words struck him, and his fists clenched at his sides. He paced the room like a caged animal, his boots thudding in restless rhythm. The air smelled faintly of rain and iron, the storm outside edging closer. You had no right to keep this from me, he said through gritted teeth. No right to decide which truths I could handle. Amina's voice dropped to a whisper, heavy with guilt. And you had no strength back then to carry it. I thought love could be enough until you were ready. But now I see love without truth is nothing but chains. The rawness of her admission startled him. He stopped pacing, his eyes softening for just a heartbeat before hardening again. Then, let me break them, he said, his tone flat, final. If this truth is mine to carry, then so is the path it demands. Amina's heart lurched. What path? She asked, though dread already coiled in her stomach. Rafik turned, his face caught in the lamplight, sharp with resolve. I need to find him, or what's left of him. He died, yes, but the people he wronged are still out there. The debts remain. I can't live in his shadow without knowing the full cost of what he did. The words fell like stones between them. Amina's breath caught, fear clashing with a strange sense of inevitability. She had spent years trying to shield him from this exact pull, and now it was unfolding before her eyes. She wanted to shout, to tell him vengeance would consume him, but she saw something in his expression that silenced her. Not just rage, but a desperate need for identity. The storm outside broke suddenly, thunder rattling the windows, rain hammering against the roof. It was as though the world itself had decided to echo the turmoil within the walls. Rafik moved toward the window, staring out into the darkness streaked by lightning. Do you hear that? He asked, his voice strangely calm. That's what's inside me, a storm that won't pass until I face it. Amina stepped forward at last, her voice trembling. And when you face it, Rafik, what will be left of you? A man who sought peace, or a man consumed by his father's sins? He turned to her slowly, his eyes searching hers, and for a fleeting, moment she thought she saw the boy he once was, the boy who had clung to her laughter, who had dreamed of nothing more than escape from the shadows of his past. But the moment vanished, replaced by the man standing before her, hardened by silence, awakened by betrayal. "You can't stop me," he said softly. "Not anymore." Amina's tears finally fell, silent and hot. She understood now that the truth she had hidden was not a wound that could be healed, but a flame that could not be contained. She reached for him, her fingers brushing his arm, but he pulled away gently, almost tenderly, as though even in his resolve he still carried love for her. The lamp sputtered as the wind forced its way through the cracks in the shutters. The letter lay abandoned on the table, its ink slowly blurring where rainwater had slipped in. Neither of them moved to save it. The truth had already done its work, and the storm outside raged on as though to mark the beginning of something neither of them could undo. Rafik sat on the wooden bench outside the house, the letter clutched in his hand, though he had read it. So many times the words had already etched themselves into his memory. Amina stood by the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her eyes fixed on him but her voice restrained, as though afraid that anything she said might shatter, the fragile balance holding them together. The silence between them was not the silence of peace, but the silence of a storm waiting to descend. He could not decide if the words written by his father were a curse or a key. All he knew was that the shadows of his bloodline had stepped into his life, and they were no longer willing to leave. The letter revealed more than betrayal. It revealed a hidden connection, a name whispered in guilt, someone Rafik had never known existed, a half-brother. The ink, though faded, carried enough weight to shake his understanding of family. A stranger who shared his father's blood was out there, alive, moving through the same world, carrying the same scars etched into a different body. The thought of it burned in his chest, filling him with both hope and rage. He turned to Amina at last, his voice low, almost unrecognizable. "You knew about him, didn't you?" Her lips parted, but no words came. The hesitation was answer enough. Rafik's breath caught in his throat, anger rising, sharp and unyielding. "All these years," he whispered, his voice breaking, "you let me believe I was alone in this. You let me drown in silence while my own blood walked this earth." His words cracked like thunder, carrying years of unspoken agony. Amina stepped forward, her face pale, her eyes brimming. "I was trying to protect you from a truth that could destroy you. Your father left a trail of ruin. I thought if I kept you away from it, you would be spared." But Rafik shook his head, his hands trembling as he gripped the letter. "You don't understand. The pain was already there. The emptiness was already there. What destroyed me was not knowing." His voice trembled, his chest heaving as if the air itself refused to fill his lungs. He felt the weight of years pressing against him, years spent wondering why his reflection carried a stranger's sorrow. Now the truth had emerged like fire in dry grass, burning everything in its path. The twist of it all lodged deep inside him. This half-brother, this hidden shadow, was not just some forgotten name. The letter hinted at his existence in the very town Rafik had crossed paths with months ago. A man with eyes that had lingered on him too long, as if searching for something familiar. A man whose voice carried an echo of his own. The memory flooded back, raw and unsettling. He had dismissed it then as coincidence. Now he understood. It had been recognition, silent and unspoken. Amina's voice trembled as she tried to steady herself. "If you find him, what then? Do you think he will embrace you like family? Or will he carry the same poison your father carried? Rafik, sometimes the blood we share is the very chain that binds us to ruin." Her words were desperate, pleading, but they only deepened his resolve. He turned his gaze toward the horizon where the sun bled into the clouds, its red glow staining the sky like a wound. I need to see him. I need to know what kind of man he became, with the same blood that runs through me." Amina's hands trembled as she reached for his arm, her touch hesitant, fragile. "And if what you find destroys you?" she whispered. Rafik met her eyes, his own burning with the fire of decision. "Then at least it will be the truth. And truth, Amina, is better than living inside a lie." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and earth, a storm building somewhere unseen. The world seemed to hold its breath as if bracing itself for what was to come. In the pit of his chest, Rafik felt a strange mixture of fear and longing. The possibility of a brother, someone who might share his pain, or someone who might mirror the darkness of his father, was a revelation that carried the weight of destiny. The moment marked a turn he could not ignore. He could no longer remain still, bound by Amina's silence or by his own grief. The road ahead was unknown, but it called to him like a drumbeat in the distance, steady and relentless. Amina's final words cut through the heavy air, soft but filled with resignation. "If you go down this path, Rafik, you may find not a brother but a rival, a stranger shaped by the same fire carrying the same scars. Be certain that you are ready for the truth, because once you open that door, there is no turning back." Rafik stood, folding the letter carefully before sliding it into his coat. His heart thundered as though each beat was a warning, but he did not falter. He had lived too long in the prison of silence, too long carrying wounds carved by secrets. Whatever lay ahead, reunion or ruin, was now the only path forward. As the first drops of rain struck the earth, he stepped out into the gathering storm, leaving behind the safety of the house and the fragile peace it had once promised. The night had grown heavier, each second thick with silence that felt almost unnatural. The old walls seemed to breathe with the weight of what was unsaid, shadows crawling where the lamplight failed to reach. Rafik stood near the window, his hand pressed against the glass, his reflection staring back like a stranger he did not recognize. Behind him, the letter still rested on the table, its paper edges curled like a wound refusing to close. Amina had not moved since he read it, her body rooted to the spot as if her stillness alone could prevent the ground from splitting beneath them. "I thought I was protecting you," she whispered at last, the words barely carrying through the tense air. "But I see now. I was protecting myself. From the day you discovered the truth, I knew it would tear us apart." Her voice wavered, and for the first time, Rafik heard the fear beneath it. Not of him, but of the storm she had unleashed, by withholding what should have been his all along. He turned sharply, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You never trusted me with the truth, Amina. That's what cuts the deepest. Do you know what it feels like to walk through life carrying a lie you didn't choose?" His voice rose, then cracked, the anger collapsing into something raw, something close to desperation. He gripped the edge of the window, knuckles whitening, his whole body quivering under the weight of emotion that had nowhere left to hide. The rain began then, sudden and hard, pelting against the roof with a violence that mirrored the tension inside. Each drop echoed like a drumbeat, building pressure with every second. Amina stepped forward, her hands trembling, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "If you walk away now, Rafik, you'll never know what choice your father truly made. That letter wasn't just a confession, it was a plea. He didn't abandon you, he abandoned himself." The twist struck like lightning, splitting the air between them. Rafik's chest tightened as he replayed the words he had just read, lines blurred by rage and sorrow. He had believed his father had turned away in selfishness, leaving a trail of ruin in his wake. But Amina's words hinted at something different, something heavier, that perhaps the man he had cursed his whole life had been running not from his son, but from a truth too dark to face. The possibility cut deeper than anger ever could. Rafik stumbled back, shaking his head as though trying to clear fog from his vision. "You think that redeems him?" His voice was hoarse now, broken at the edges. "You think saying he was too weak to stay makes me feel less abandoned? It makes me despise him more, and maybe it makes me despise myself." The confession tore out of him before he could swallow it, leaving the room ringing with its echo. Amina reached for him then, her fingers trembling, but he pulled away, his body rigid, his breath ragged. The storm outside raged louder, wind howling through unseen cracks, making the house shudder as though it might come apart. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but she did not allow them to fall. "You are not your father," she said firmly, her voice gaining strength through the tremor. "And you will never become him, unless you choose to." The silence that followed was suffocating, punctuated only by the relentless pounding of rain. Rafiq's chest rose and fell as though he were drowning on dry land. The letter still lay between them like an open wound, its presence daring him to decide whether it would define him or destroy him. The night had shifted, the storm outside now a mirror to the one raging within. Neither of them knew whether dawn would bring resolution or ruin, but both felt that the choice, once made, could never be undone. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the air raw and heavy with the scent of wet earth. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that follows an argument too deep to erase, too heavy to ignore. Rafiq sat at the edge of the table, his hands folded, the letter lying open before him. Its words had carved into him, rearranging his anger into something he could not yet name. Outside, water dripped from the eaves in steady rhythm. The world, slowly stitching itself back together. Amina stood near the window, her face pale with exhaustion, though her eyes had not left him once. She could feel the fragile distance between them, like a glass wall that might shatter with the slightest touch. Her body ached to speak, to reach him, but she knew that whatever happened now had to come from him. She had already carried the weight of choices not hers to make. Rafiq exhaled, a long breath that seemed to deflate the last remnants of rage clinging to him. His fingers brushed the paper again, slower this time, as though he was no longer afraid of its truth. "All my life," he said quietly, his voice almost foreign to him, "I believed I was abandoned because I wasn't enough. Too weak, too unworthy. Every silence, every absence, I wore it like a scar carved into my skin. But this—" He paused, swallowing hard. "This letter tells me he didn't leave me. He left himself. And in a way, that's worse, isn't it? Because it means I was never even part of his decision." Amina's throat tightened, but she held her ground. She wanted to argue, to insist that there was still love hidden between those faded lines, but she knew better. He didn't need her defense of a man who was already gone. What he needed was the space to redefine himself without that shadow. She walked closer, slow steps across the creaking floor, and stopped just short of him. "Maybe the letter doesn't absolve him," she said softly. "But maybe it releases you. You don't have to carry his choices anymore. You can choose differently." The words lingered, and for a moment Rafiq felt the weight shift inside him. He looked up at her, his eyes ringed with exhaustion but stripped of fire. "Then what do I do with all these years? The anger, the shame, everything I built my life around? If I let it go, what's left of me?" His voice broke, not from anger, but from the sheer emptiness of not knowing who he was without the burden he had carried. Amina reached out then, her hand trembling as it touched his. The gesture was small, but it was enough. "What's left," she said, her voice steadier now, "is the part of you that was always stronger than he ever was. The part that stayed. The part that still chooses." Her fingers curled over his knuckles, grounding him. "That is who you are, Rafiq. Not his shadow, not his silence. Just you." His shoulders sagged, the tension draining from him at last. For the first time, he allowed the tears to fall, quietly, without shame. They slid down his face like rain against the window pane, each one loosening a knot tied years ago. He didn't weep for his father, nor even for the years lost to anger. He wept for himself, for the boy who had waited at the edge of every road, searching faces that would never turn to him. And in those tears, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but release. The morning light slipped through the window, pale and tentative, touching the letter on the table. Its edges curled under the glow, fragile as old skin. Rafik looked at it one last time before folding it carefully, not to preserve the lie, but to place it where it belonged, in the past. He slid it back across the table, his hand steady now. "I can't change what he did," he said, his voice firm though quiet. "But I can decide what I carry from here." Amina's eyes softened with relief. She squeezed his hand once more, then released it, knowing the choice was his alone. Together they sat in the hush of the room, the storm gone, the silence no longer heavy but alive with possibility. Outside, the ground shimmered with broken sunlight, and the branches swayed as though the earth itself was breathing easier. Rafik rose to his feet, his body still tired but lighter than it had been in years. He glanced back once at the table, at the folded letter that no longer commanded him, then stepped toward the door. His steps were quiet, but they carried the weight of someone stepping out from under a shadow. Amina followed, not to lead him, not to hold him back, but simply to walk beside him into the uncertain morning. The past had not disappeared. It never would. But the dawn had offered him a choice, and for the first time he took it, not as the son of a broken man, not as the keeper of secrets, but as his own.